Chapter 19, 1976, Soul Snatchers. Roy, Linda, and Judy still lived at our dad's. Mark and I, with our new baby, would generally spend the day back at the house. Linda was still pregnant, and Mark and Roy had found a roofing job together. Mark had just bought a work truck, a blue '59 Chevy, top-heavy with a lightweight short bed. Mark, being a young male, was proud of the truck that he considered a classic. I had been moved out of my childhood home for about 2 months when one evening my two, now familiar, gray beings appeared at mine and Mark's bedside. On seeing them, I wondered in a childlike manner what they thought of me being in this new place, and naively looked for their approval, wondering if they were happy with me. Maybe it was because I was still only 18, and maybe this reaction was instinctive from years of being treated like a child by these creatures. I was lying on the outside of the bed so I could get to the baby in the night, and Mark was against the wall. As one being stood looking at me, the other instructed Mark to move to the foot of the bed. Once Mark scooted to the foot of the bed, the gray offered him a substance contained in a glass. Mark began to comply, then hesitated as if he wasn't sure to trust the alien. The being assured him that it would not harm him. He projected in thought that the liquid would go through his body from head to toe, leaving a residue behind. This was to protect him, he said. Mark drank the substance without objection, even to taste. He then told Mark that within an hour he would throw up, but he would be okay. Meanwhile, the other gray, still standing over me, studied me in a way that I felt was different somehow, more attentive, more concerned. Once Mark settled back in, this gray moved forward and gently tucked me in. He said, "Rest now, for tomorrow is an important day." It was a strange thing to say, but I paid it no mind. I felt comforted and gladly, nestled down and went back to sleep. Within an hour, Mark's gagging reawakened me. He arose, and with his head hanging out the door, threw up. I got up and asked him if he had felt sick before he went to bed. He hadn't. Curiosity drove me to look out the door, and I saw a reddish, lumpy substance that looked like watermelon, but more of a crimson color. Mark replied that he had not eaten watermelon. He decided that he did not feel sick, so we went back to bed. The next morning we awoke, and I asked how he felt. Should he go to work? I followed his gaze toward the bassinet where our baby kicked and cooed. The answer was obvious. He walked over and smiled down at the baby. We drove to my dad's house so that Mark could take Roy with him to the roofing job he had found. On the way, we picked up another worker. Once at my dad's house, Mark and I stood over Roy and Linda as they lay in the twin bed in the back room. Truthfully, I did not want the men to go, and silently hoped that something would intervene. Roy seemed to sense the same thing. When he looked at Linda's belly, Mark and I knew what he was feeling, the same sense of responsibility that Mark had felt. While Roy got ready, I sat in the living room in the chair facing the front door. Mark went outside. Roy soon appeared, and halfway across the living room he paused. He paused the way one does when making a mental assessment that everything they needed to do had been done. Then he said, "I've got to go say goodbye to Judy." He headed down the hall where she was sleeping, and I heard him wake her. "Judy, Judy, I just wanted to tell you goodbye." She mumbled back a sleepy goodbye. God, how it breaks my heart to even think of this. I can still hear the exchange between him and her, realizing now that it would be the last time they would speak. Again, Roy crossed the living room, and this time he paused in the doorway, his large frame silhouetted by the light from outside. He turned to me, and my heart leapt out to him. I will never see him come through that door again, I thought. There was an impulse to go to him, to hug him, but something would not allow me. He and I exchanged goodbyes, and after one more brief hesitation, he turned and forged ahead. After a moment, I returned to the room with Linda and sat in the wicker chair with my back against the window. As Linda lay in bed, we spoke for a few minutes. Suddenly and quite strangely, I felt myself being overcome with sleep and struggled to stay awake. I commented to Linda about it, while at the same time, Linda rolled over to face the wall. Even though I had already been up several hours, my head tilted back, and I fell unconscious in a deep sleep. Next, it felt as if an extremely strong magnet was tugging me backward out of my body. It pulled me up and out through the window at my back. My consciousness drifted near the top of the weeping willow tree in the backyard. I could see the outside of our house and the bedroom I had just been in. I became aware that the consciousness of another being was with me when he said that we must hurry. Someone was waiting for us. But I couldn't see the being, I only sensed his presence. We moved freely and swiftly over the tops of trees at lightning speed. We were not in any vehicle. The next thing I became aware of is standing in a heavily wooded area looking down at the ground and becoming aware of the thick carpet of many years of fallen leaves, damp from a misty morning. Then I noticed the taller authority, being who had been waiting for us, was standing far to my right. Now alone and together, we waited. The escort gray who brought me was nowhere in sight, but he had the attention of the authority gray, so I too focused in his direction. I heard footsteps up ahead at the edge of the woods, at a road. He watched for something. I had no idea what he watched for or why I was even there, but knew that something was happening. Soon, the escort gray at the edge of the woods sent a mental alert to the authority gray. On this, the authority gray held out his left arm straight in front of him toward the unseen road. A loud, heavy rumbling noise ensued with a boom, 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 and boom. Alarmed, I worried for a moment that this monstrosity was going to continue in our direction. The authority gray knew what I was thinking and quickly reassured me. There was now silence as we both continued to wait. Next, a series of dueling footsteps made some starts, then stops as if playing off each other. A couple of minutes later, footsteps began coming our way. The gray who had brought me here appeared to have Roy with him, and they were talking. They stopped a good distance away, and on spotting me, Roy asked with surprise, "Jennifer, what are you doing here?" The authority gray had a mental hold on me, and to my utter frustration, I could not move nor speak as he addressed Roy, "You must go with us." To which Roy replied, "No, I want to go back." He is told that he cannot. Twice more Roy states he wants to go back, implying to his body and his life, and each time he is told that he cannot. With reluctance, the authority gray informed Roy that his body has been crushed and says, "You cannot go back, and you cannot stay. You must go with us." Realizing then that they intended to take my brother, I became enraged. I fought desperately against the authority gray's paralyzing grip, but could not break loose. He continued his questioning. "Do you trust Jennifer?" Roy answered that he did. "If she told you to go with us, would you?" he asked. Roy answered, "Yeah, I guess so." "Then ask her," the being replied. "Jennifer, do you think I should go with them?" Seething with unadulterated anger, I did not want them to take Roy from me. In my mind, I was screaming, "No!" But the authority gray would not release me. I had briefly been put unconscious before hearing myself saying, "Yes, as calmly as you please." Roy dropped his head and replied, "Well, okay then." It saddened me to know that my objections were futile. Meanwhile, the escort being remained standing next to Roy. Looking up, Roy asked, "But what about you guys? Who's going to take care of you guys?" Instead of addressing Roy, the authority gray addressed me by saying that they would be watching over us. I knew that what he said was true, so I repeated to Roy, almost flatly, "Don't worry about us. They are going to watch over us." Nodding, Roy said, "Okay then, I'll go." The escort took him by the arm, and with an upward motion, they disappeared. There's only one problem with this scenario, which I will get to in a minute. I had mentally followed the Gray's departure and could see when he landed aboard ship, and he didn't have Roy with him. As soon as they were gone, the authority Gray turned to me and walked over. He claimed not to understand why I had become angry and wanted me to explain it to him. "I am willing to wait here together with Roy in this very spot forever, until the end of time when y'all come back again." In my out-of-body state of mind, I sensed that they had been with us from the beginning, but for a specific period of time had decided to withdraw. They ran this reality of ours from behind the scenes and always had, and not that I didn't resent them for it in the current moment. He and I both knew that someday when it suited them, they would return among us again. That was the plan. My request to wait in this spot with Roy was denied. "You cannot stay here, you must go back. There are still things that you have to do," he said, being nondescript. And I remembered I had a baby at home. Then he began telling me I was not going to be distraught, not be upset. In retrospect, this was a rather kind thing to do. He looked around as if to survey and said, "You are not going to remember what had happened here." and added with a smile, "But someday you will remember." And just as he was going to add more by saying, "In fact," the escort gray suddenly reappeared and interrupted him. The authority gray looked at me one more time before instructing the escort to return me home. The next thing I knew, I was back in the chair, its texture beneath me as my hands rested upon its arms. Linda stirred awake just as I sat forward. Hints of a strange dream disturbed me, and Linda asked to hear it. With the thudding sound still in my head, I struggled to formulate. There was this loud, heavy rumbling noise. Boom, 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 but I can't remember what it was. I struggled to remember because I felt it was significant. Suddenly the phone rang, and when it did, the memory was snatched from my grasp. Linda jumped up and rushed to answer the phone. A woman reported that there had been an accident. She had stopped and was given our number by a desperate young man who pleaded for her to call his wife. She was sorry to say, but believed one was dead. The ambulances were already at the scene. Linda told the woman that we both had husbands and tried to get more information, but the woman did not know. "I'm terribly sorry," she offered. She gave the location as Cold Springs, Texas, before hanging up. It seemed to me they had been gone only 10 minutes. How could they be in Cold Springs already when the drive from North Houston was at least 50 minutes away? Maybe the woman was mistaken. We quickly awakened Judy to watch my baby, and we got the neighbor to drive us. As we drove for what seemed like an eternity, again I puzzled. How could they have gotten this far when they just left? We arrived at the scene and the police let us through. Linda and I stood looking at the truck over on its side in the muddy ravine. I looked towards the woods with a sense that we were being watched. I picked up that they were concerned with Linda's reaction, and that she might be so distraught she would go into early labor. I put my arm around her shoulder. "It's going to be okay, Linda," I said. At that point, I received the suggestion that my earlier recall of a strange dream had been about standing here with Linda. For many years, I would say that I had dreamed about Roy's death, of Linda and me standing at the muddy ravine. The ambulances were ready to leave, and we got in the neighbor's car to follow. From the front seat, Linda turned to me and said, "Jennifer, I saw Mark, but I didn't see Roy. Did you see him?" No, I hadn't. We both hoped for a miracle. At the hospital, I was finally allowed to see Mark. He was lying on a cold steel gurney, staring up at the ceiling with silent tears streaming from the corners of his eyes. I asked if he was hurt. He said he wasn't. "Then why are you crying?" I asked. He answered, "Because you are going to hate me." I assured him that I would not hate him. Besides, it was an accident. "You're going to have to promise me something," he said. "You have to promise that you will never say anything to me about it." I promised him that I wouldn't. Then a wailing began, out in the hallway. Peering out the door, I saw our dad slumped to the floor, with his face buried in his hands. Throughout the whole ordeal, Linda remained in a silent state of shock. Everything was so surreal. Doctors assured us that Roy had died instantly. Back at the house, we all sat in the living room. Mark was trying to apologize to my dad, who did not want to talk about it. Our attention was turned to the sound of light footsteps coming slowly down the hall. Everyone looked in its direction. Dad whispered, "Do you hear that?" Sitting closest to the spot where the footsteps had stopped, I half expected to see something. There was only a sense of woefulness looking back at us. My dad carefully watched my face as I stared at the empty space. "I heard the footsteps, but I don't see anything," I reported. Mentally, I gave reassurance to this invisible presence that we were okay. After a moment of solemn silence, we ventured to discuss the tragedy. Mark tried to explain what had happened. They were on a long stretch of country road. Roy sat by the passenger door, and the friend they had picked up sat in the middle. They came upon a double hairpin curve known by reputation as Dead Man's Curve. With the heavy cab but lightweight bed, the tail end of the truck lifted off the dewy road. In this instance, applying brakes did not help as the back end of the truck slid around. During the first impact, Mark recalled seeing Roy make a futile grab for the friend who flew through the shattered windshield. Roy's last act of compassion. Mark felt he must have blacked out at some point. "Did you hit your head?" I asked. He didn't remember. "Do you have a bump on your head?" He felt his head and did not find one. "Are you sore or anything?" I asked. Checking all extremities, he announced he felt fine. In fact, even though the truck tumbled end over end, Mark miraculously had no injuries. Was this the purpose of the mysterious drink the Gray handed him the night before? Mark remembered waking up on the driver's floorboard. He began to look for Roy and call his name. He found the friend in the ditch several yards away, moaning about his back. Mark told him not to move. "Where's Roy?" Mark repeatedly asked his wounded friend. Then Mark heard human-sounding footsteps walking at the edge of the woods. He found this strange considering it was out in the middle of nowhere, and that an animal would have been scared away by the noise. It occurred to Mark that Roy might have been frightened and ran off in the woods to hide. He called for Roy to come out, but each time Mark walked toward the footsteps, they walked away from him. He would stop, and they would stop. This happened 3 times until something told him to go back to the truck. Back at the truck, he found what he thought were Roy's shoes. He reached to pick them up and realized in horror that the truck had landed on Roy. Mark began trying to lift the truck because he thought Roy must be drowning in the mud. If he could just get the truck off him, he could save his life. A few people stopped on the lightly traveled road, and Mark screamed to them for help as he strained to lift the truck. They stood and watched, knowing that it was too late. Mark cursed them, spitting vulgar names. A few men came down to help lift, but it was useless. The truck was too heavy. Mark would not give up. He continued trying to lift the truck. Even after the police arrived, he struggled. They wrenched Mark away as he fought them in a vain attempt to save Roy. The ambulance personnel gave him a shot to calm him down. As they placed him in the back of the ambulance, Mark tearfully pleaded with a woman to call his wife. That was the call that Diane had answered. There is little doubt that I had been there when the truck wrecked. I heard the booming sound, and the truck flipped end over end, and the footsteps I had heard matched Mark's account of the event. The question is, was Roy's soul really with the escort Gray, or was this a fabricated mirage to trick me? Had it all been staged? The implication that Gray aliens took my brother's soul are profound. Why go to such trouble to stage an event that I would not remember for years to come? 14 years would pass before I fully recalled being in the woods with the aliens on that fateful day. And a whopping 36 years would pass before the story first became available to the public. Even if staged, they still knew ahead of time where and when the accident would occur. They had even appeared the night before and given Mark a drink before telling me to rest now, for tomorrow is an important day. All of Roy's life had led up to that day, all the premonitions, the omens. He knew he was going to die, just as I knew that I was appointed to watch him, to observe, and that someday I would write a book. Still, I cannot vouch for the authenticity of the bizarre scene in the woods. I have told the event as it was intended to appear. I vaguely remember that after the accident, a large object like a metal cabinet with drawers appeared at that spot. The escort Gray took out a black wig, and placing it on his head stood off from me. I knew it was him and objected. The escort Gray told the authority Gray that they were not going to be able to trick me. The authority Gray had the escort stand even further back. He must have been using a wig while pretending to be Roy. When the escort Gray supposedly left with Roy, I had mentally followed him, like one does when remote viewing. I saw the escort arrive aboard ship with all its chrome, but Roy was not with him. When I relayed this to the authority Gray, he shut me down. This is when he came over and asked why I had gotten so angry. I am not going to try and convince anyone that the aliens took my brother's soul, because it is more likely that they staged the event to have me mislead you, and I refuse to be responsible for misleading anyone. The aliens are so good at using smoke and mirrors that it is hard to know which is right and which is an illusion. This is a Moody Blues song reference. Let me state right here that I don't believe they took my brother's soul. I think it was an elaborate, premeditated hoax, one that was years in the making. That does not negate that they might have a hand in the human reincarnation cycle. They have the ability to transfer their own consciousness into fabricated bodies. And recall that the escort Gray had pulled my consciousness from the body that fateful day as I sat in the wicker chair. But if the escort took Roy, why didn't I see him when the escort left the scene and boarded the ship? Why did he put on a wig and stand off in the distance to pretend to be Roy? It seems that part of the experience was genuine, while another part of it was staged. This concludes Chapter 19 of Aliens in Our Midst. In the next chapter, we are going to speculate on what this staged soul capture could mean. Please like and comment, and if you haven't already, please subscribe.